All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. Our next panel is titled Model Risk, How the Speed of Digitization Changes Risk. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And I'll hand it over to Agus, our moderator.
Thank you, Patricia. Hello, everybody. Let me do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Agus Sudjianto. I'm the head of model risk for Wells Fargo. I have the pleasure today to moderate this session. We have a stellar panelist here with wealth of experience. So I think it's going to be a very lively and interesting discussion. So with that, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Stu?
Hi, thanks, Agus. Welcome, everybody. My name is Stu Bailey. I'm the co-founder of ModelOp, and we have brought our software, ModelOp Center, into the market for the very large enterprise. It's a market-defining product for governing and automating models at the enterprise level. In the kind of face of modern AI and model-driven initiatives. So very happy to talk to be part of this distinguished panel around risk, that is a key driver in our experience in the large enterprise for model operations.
I'll go next to Harish, is an old-time friend back from his SBC days. So go ahead, Harish.
Thanks a lot, Agus. Hi, everyone. I've been in model risk almost for 10 years now. So as we are celebrating the 10-year anniversary of SR 11.7, that's kind of how long I have been in there. I started doing this with HSBC and built their model risk platform for HSBC North America, comparing all the businesses they have here. And then most recently, I was doing the same thing at Bank of America, covering consumer, small business, and wealth management. I'm pretty excited to be on this panel. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll be able to share some insights and some challenges we have been facing so far. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thank you, Harish. Chris, we'll go next.
Yes, thanks, Agus. Hi, everybody. My name is Krish Swamy. Work at Wells Fargo alongside with Agus. I work in the model development space, so responsible for AI and machine learning model development at the bank. Have been doing this, I would say, for the last 3 or 4 years. Prior to that, I've been definitely involved in the data science space, and at my previous company there was a 2 or 3 year stint where I worked on model risk as well. So have definitely seen both sides of the coin. Excited to be on the panel and excited to meet my fellow panelists.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. Julian.
Thanks, Sudjianto. Yeah, Julian Horky, head of risk controlling for Berenberg Capital Markets in New York. Prior to joining Berenberg, I was working for about almost 10 years in Europe and the US as a consultant, mainly in enterprise risk and quantitative advisory, where I was really working on countless models for all types of large financial institutions, and I'm really looking forward to hear more and share my experience that I had from working with all sorts of model risk groups in the industry.
Last but not least, Dan.
Thank you, Agus. My name is Dan Bailey. I work for Gateway First Bank based in Dallas, Texas area. I have responsibility for oversight of all operational risk. That would include our model risk management program, which we have relatively built our framework foundation, et cetera, out on that in particular, and working on maturing that process overall. So very excited to talk with the panelists here and not only learn, but maybe pass on a nugget of wisdom or something along the way. But have been involved with model risk management probably for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm a little long in the tooth, as they say, in risk management in general, having done this for probably over 35 years. So looking forward to our time together.
Thank you so much. So we have wealth and diverse background here. I think the conversation will be will be fascinating. I'm excited about the session. So Harish talked about that this year we're celebrating SR 11.7 OCC 11-12, the 10 years anniversary. Very, very transformational regulatory guidance on model risk management that has transformed banks in terms of how we manage model risk. We bear the evidence of the how useful this one is when COVID-19 hit almost 2 years back, right? The banks are ready, unlike the past crisis. So it has been phenomenal for me, the experience of this. I myself has been with Wells Fargo for 8.5 years as the head of model risk, and saw and experienced how banks across the board in the US maturing in their practice, particularly large banks. So with this, given the maturity in many banks in terms of modeling managing the model risk, the entire life cycle from model inception to model retirement with all the discipline, I would like to switch a little bit, thinking about how can we do it faster. Yes, we know how to manage it. We know how to manage it well. Can we break it to think about some things that somewhat will be a paradigm shift? So this is going to be a lively discussion. So let me start with the question that I have here, because with the speed of digitization, COVID is one of the strong driver behind that. And then the adoption of automation, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Now we have more and more model embedded in our software, model driving the decision and automation. So with that, with the need for that, we also the need to for speed in terms of model development and deployment. So I would like to ask Krish. Krish, as a model developer, which area that you have seen this demand to be able to develop and deploy model fast?
Yeah, so Agus, there is definitely a number of different areas where we have certainly seen this need. Let's start with something, very well known to, I'm sure, most people, which is the area of marketing, right? So marketing has been around for decades, where people have used quantitative models. But I think with changes in customer behavior, with the rise of digital channels, that marketing function of developing models now needs to become faster and faster. Okay, so that is definitely an area where speed is starting to get important. So that's obviously a very traditional space as far as modeling is concerned. But interestingly, I think we are also seeing a number of new areas, and I think it ties back to the theme of this conference, digital experience, digitization, right? Whether it is a experience on a digital device like a phone or the computer, or even if it is an in-person experience, a lot of those experiences tend to be augmented with digital technology. These are all, again, places where models need to be developed quickly and, importantly, deployed within their applications. A third potential area which comes to mind is, I think all of us are aware of all of the concerns that are sitting out there in terms of customer privacy. So, how do you think about protecting customer data? How do you keep them in control of that? But then how do you marry that with the benefits of positive experience that will require some of that data to be shared? So what we are, I think, starting to look about is where we can have machine learning not happening centrally, but happening locally, okay, where the machine learning and the model training and the model deployment happens within the control of the consumer. And I see that as being another area where model development and model deployment is going to be remote, and it's going to need to go away from the model that I think most of us have been used to, which is the data coming together centrally, models being trained centrally, being deployed centrally, etc. So I think these are definitely areas that I see as going.
Thank you. Julian, from your consulting experience, did you see anything else like that? Anything in the need for faster fraud model deployment, faster cybersecurity models? So Dan or Julian, if you want to share anything.
I mean, I believe it really depends on the maturity stage of the firm that you're in, right? Like, I mean, like I saw, like, for example, like folks that are using especially AI models in the AML space. I think this is something where AI models were used very early on, already like a couple of years ago when I was like still back in the consulting world. I think there was certainly one of the first areas in the financial world where we really saw like AML models being used heavily and like very successfully. Another thing where I see like recently more and more is on the trade surveillance side. I mean, like where we see like or I don't want to start like naming all these different areas, but I think where we always see like machine learning models and AI models and like that stuff being deployed is wherever we have like some sort of like pattern recognition. I think this is essentially like one of the strengths, right? In predictive models, I haven't seen it so much in terms of like forecasting, for example, for CCAR or anything like that. I saw that being used a little bit, but like never really successfully. So I think, yeah, like the AML stuff is something where I saw it a lot.
Right. Excellent. Thank you. And as we want to develop and deploy model faster and faster here, considering the model risk management requirement, that's going to be very, very expansive, right? So what do you see as a speed bump here? So maybe Stu, we start with you, Stu. So we want it too fast. What are the speed bumps?
Sure, Gus. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And in Q4 of 2021, we have a little bit of the advantage to see kind of across the marketplace. And just as Krish and Julian said, there's just so many new use cases driving kind of model-driven initiatives. And so the main kind of speed bumps, the general class of speed bump, has to do with the distance between, really well-established model risk management programs. As you said, we're celebrating, 10 years of SR 11.7, and kind of the very, very fast-paced innovation happening at the AI and data science level. And that can manifest in a couple of different ways. One is, as you know, kind of industry-wide, of course, there are been several kind of leading innovative, but even in some of the largest, most successful and forward-thinking, financial services institutions, model risk is often a practice, while well-established, that tends to scale with bodies. We have a certain amount of models that we have to get validated, right? And that's kind of in direct conflict with the ability to leverage technology to drive scale in terms of the number of models, right? So that kind of impedance mismatch can really manifest in a lot of ways. One example is there could be a real understanding that like technology needs to be brought in to automate things, but a traditional and very functional model risk management group might not be experienced in buying, kind of comprehensive automation software that then kind of gets in front of the data science process, which, in our experience, we found lots of experimentation happening in machine learning and artificial intelligence that doesn't even yet have the front end of governance, like model inception, risk classification based on the use case, right? So you're going to get in this situation where, hey, we have models, we have use cases, we have a risk process, but they haven't really come together under a cohesive framework that can be automated. And that kind of exposes a wide variety of speed bumps that have to be navigated. Sometimes we say it's not so much a speed bump as actually the AI iceberg. It's like just the tip of that iceberg.
Yeah. I want to ask Krish Swamy. Let me toss it back to Krish a little bit, because Krish is in the forefront of this in model development. And share a bit experience, Krish. How you saw these things and you try to solve. You think a lot and try to solve this speed bump. And where are the speed bump and how you get around it, Krish?
Yeah. See, I think you're right, Stu. I think there is a lot of innovation and iterations that happen with model development. And candidly, I think that's been around for a really long time. It is just that the timescales have gotten very, very small now. Okay, so I think that's a big thing. Plus, I think the types of use cases have just exploded, right? So I think those are the two things that have happened. What we've tried to do internally, and what I think is really important, and it's a journey, right? So I wouldn't say that we are anywhere close to even being done, is really by on the one side working closely with model risk management throughout that model life cycle. Okay, so that it's not like it's not a sequential model where we come up with the idea, we train the model, we validate it, we test the model, and then we turn it over to validation to kind of do their work, and then we deploy it. We tend to think of it almost as a continuous cycle, okay, where we are in conversations with model risk management throughout this entire process to be able to, make sure that, there is model risk management understands what we are trying to do, and at the same time has got visibility into the work that we are doing, so that that happens really in a concurrent fashion.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of things that have happened in parallel, let's say, right, as we've worked through this first 10 years, and we're going to have to move into more of a they've happened serially, not in parallelism. They've happened in a serial nature, and we're going to have to move, I think, in these next 5 to 10 years in more of a parallel manner. And in doing that, I think we're going to, if we haven't already seen a lack of real business expertise within our model development processes, I think as this goes faster, we're going to start to see some of those gaps, if you will. And so we've got to figure out what's it going to take to plug some of those gaps. And I don't think it's even just the model development process. Agus, you touched on it earlier in the introduction, with regard to the governance processes around managing the model program. We're going to have some models, I think, or at least robotic process automation built into a lot of what we're doing, trying to govern these processes in general as well. And again, I think everybody suffers from we have to figure out how to do more with less syndrome. And as we really continue down that path, it's going to expose a few gaps. And I think there's some really smart people out there that are going to be able to help figure out how do we plug those gaps.
Yeah, and no, Dan, I think well said. The other point, I think, which I think we've tried to really bring about, definitely in the development community, is really a culture around reproducibility and governance, okay, and build that in kind of really as first principles in the overall process, right? The typical kind of approach, I've seen kind of two extremes, okay, where you start with governance and everything gets determined by governance, okay, and that obviously doesn't work in the speed paradigm. Or you have the other extreme where people are just trying, experimenting, and so on, right? And governance becomes an afterthought, and you try and bolt it on later on, and that doesn't work either. What we've tried to do is really kind of design our model development processes so that that documentation, the auditability, the the management of not just the model, but the code and the data becomes integrated into the process. And we built a decent amount of automation in there so that the data scientist doesn't have to think about governance. It happens really as part of that overall automation. Because if you ask somebody to do it, if you ask somebody to do anything that they don't want to do, they're not going to do it. Okay, or if they do it, they're going to do it badly, right? So I think we've got to recognize that and just say, okay, how do we support, how do we not compromise on the data science experience, but do a lot of this logging, the information capture really happen in the background so that the data scientist doesn't have to do that as an explicit step.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. I want to ask Harish here because Harish has a wealth of experience on the MRM. So we know Harish in the MRM community, we always look at all models are wrong, right? And when they are wrong, they create harm either to the institution or the customer or the model user. So what's your thought when we want to remove all the speed bump, we want to be more parallel, but we don't want to compromise in terms of safety and soundness? What's your thought, Harish?
Yeah, so generally what you're calling speed bump, Agus, I can broadly categorize them maybe into three categories, right? One comes from lack of clarity. It's not really clear to the organization what model risk wants, right? There's a particular model and the developer really has no definite clue about these are the 50 things model risk will require to approve my model, right? I would say that a mature organization should have kind of clarified most of those issues by now. If not, I think the onus is on model risk management to clearly highlight why they require something, what do they require, so that the developer can proactively build that in their process, which obviously will reduce the time to completion, right? The second type of speed bump is something which is hard to predict, a complete surprise, right? Let's say maybe COVID 2019, right? That should happen less and less often. And obviously, every time that happens, your process should kind of incorporate those type of events so that in future you are more well prepared for it. The third is there is no surprise, everything is very clear, but frankly, the incentives in the organization are not strong enough that the first line kind of follows those processes. So I would like to take a different tag than maybe what we have taken so far. I think automation is fantastic, technology is fantastic, but people really have to buy into their responsibilities and execute on them. I don't think if a model developer doesn't follow the very well communicated requirements of MRM or audit, I don't think automation or technology is really going to help you much there. If anything, it might create disasters at scale, which really you don't really want those, right? So I think we have to be very careful. With technology, with big data comes scale, and you will fail at scale also. So you have to be very careful how you compartmentalize stuff, and your risk rating is extremely important. And then I'll go back to it. Your first line has to be appropriately incentivized to follow well-known transparent processes which are required to be conducted. At the same time, model risk has to be held responsible that their process is very well defined, very well communicated, and is being executed on consistently without unnecessary surprises. So I think I would say a very good process and incentives is more important, and then technology can help you kind of expedite that very good process you have put in place.
I think that's a very excellent point. In terms of the culture as well as the process, right? That's maturity on the culture and the process. I probably want to spin it a little bit on that. So what happened? We all then talk about sequential things that go in parallel. Let's say, for the sake of discussion, as the risk, using the risk lens here. So our question is to Dan, Harish, or Julian here. Would you be comfortable allowing model to go to deployment without going to a full validation first?
Yeah, I will be comfortable, and actually we have done that. In both the organization I've worked in and led model risk organizations, we have done that. Earlier in the period, it used to be that at the very least, you review the model for conceptual soundness so that at least conceptually, nothing really, really bad is going to happen. And hopefully you try to do it only for less material models for the organization. But in more recent experiences, we have been able to do that in a well-controlled manner, even for more important models. And the idea is this. I think this will take a little bit of rethinking on MRM part and some creativity. You have to almost change the definition of what you think as a model. Instead of thinking of a model as a static entity, you can almost reframe it and expand the definition by saying that model is this process, which as of right now is this particular equation. But as long as this equation changes within these pre-agreed, pre-approved, pre-tested guardrails, you don't have to keep coming back to MRM. Only if the changes is big enough that you are going outside of these realms, you come back to us, and then we invest the time in reviewing and approving it before use. Because if you don't do that, frankly, you are creating a big risk for the customer and organizations. So things like AML or fraud risk or cybersecurity. The risk of an unapproved model is much less than the risk of responding to that external or internal threat. So I do think we have to almost like, you can call it MRM 2.0, but we have to kind of rethink and be a little bit more creative so that we are not taking too much risk for the customer or the company for the sake of, let's say, old school model risk governance.
I agree with you, Harish. And where you started going was, I thought, very interesting in not viewing models as anything that is considered static. They're very dynamic in nature because they're things you have to maintain, right? And through that maintenance, there's a collaborative process that has to take place. And so, you know, that may be an MRM 2.0 type approach to this, and I completely agree with you there. To your question, Agus, as far as whether you would be comfortable, whether I would be comfortable allowing a model to be implemented without going through a full validation. Let me take you back to a different element of risk management called business continuity, right? And I think we're all probably familiar and aware of, you know, what all that looks like. One of the things that had to evolve in the way we think about testing a business continuity plan over time, and again, I've been doing that in particular for quite a long time. Everybody just thought we had to test, exercise, you know, et cetera, right? And then the regulators, you know, were holding us to all of that. Well, what happens when we actually have a real disaster? Shouldn't we be allowed to take that perspective of all of the lessons that we learned and consider that similar to something like an exercise or a test, right? The answer to that ultimately came to a yes, we can start to consider those. So as I think about MRM and I bring that business continuity concept over to MRM and the question you asked, I would say, if we've gone through a full battery of testing prior to implementation, we've essentially done a bit of a validation there. So why can't we, you know, take that idea of that full battery of testing, consider that a validation prior to implementation, and give us that faster runway to be more agile and release these or deploy these sooner rather than later. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Julian, from your side, on the control side here, especially the senior concept in the trading side, right?
What Dan said, I mean, like, it resonates a lot with me. I mean, and I would also say, like, whether from a risk perspective, whether you feel comfortable or not, I would not even go down to that normative statement. I would really think more about, like, the factual thing where, like, these moles are used, for example, like in times of crisis when other moles are using. And we saw that in for example, COVID, like when old moles break, what business personnel does is they quickly use new moles, and they might not go through any sort of validation. And like to some extent, you have to say, like, look, I mean, like, it's still better than using no mole at all, right? So, and I think it's what's maybe interesting or what's problematic and interesting at the same time is that it seems like moles are used without validations exactly in those times of crisis, exactly when the stakes are high. So I think this is something that I noticed, that whenever you see a lot of volatility, whenever you see a shift in market data, like a very strong shift, like for example COVID, this is exactly when people start using unvalidated models because the old ones are breaking down. So I think this is something where essentially, like, whether you like it or not, it's something that you see. And I think we have to have enough flexibility in the governance to allow that, because what would be the alternative, right? Not using a model at all, right? I mean, that would be even worse alternative, I guess.
In the e-trading, we have concept of kill switch, right? The model doesn't work, we kill it, right? So I think that kill switch, limping mode. I used to design car engine, so when throttle body fail to close, you go to a limping mode, basically, right? So so I think there should be a safety something in there. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So so hearing Harish, Dan, Julian, kind of on what you guys talked about, right? And having been on the model risk management side myself, in a previous life, albeit, Agus, if you ask me that question saying, would I be comfortable, getting a model into production without like full validation? Part of my answer is that it depends on the model developer. There are certain model developers with whom I would be very comfortable because I know that they're responsible. I know they're diligent. I know that they have attention to detail. And there are certain other model developers with whom I will not be comfortable, okay? Because either I don't know how they work, or from prior examples, they have not done a good job about, following those practices. And that is something that I think, Harish, to your point on model governance 2.0, what I've seen with governance is that governance tends to validate the process, it tends to validate the documentation, it tends to validate the technology. It somehow doesn't validate the people doing the work. Okay, and I think that is super critical in anything that we do. So I'm curious as to what
this is very, very interesting. I like to use the analogy of Formula One racing, right? We need to have expert driver who really know how to drive and operate sophisticated engine, right? The very well engineered car. And we have the crew and the designer who design very, very safe car and know and have monitoring system, know when to make a pit stop to do maintenance, right? So this is bring to my next question on the organization side. Should we, or what do you think about the organization? Let me share with you a little bit. In Wells Fargo, I was a little bit draconian in the sense that not everybody can drive Formula One car. Only really expert driver. So with that, we have what we call it Center of Excellence of Model Development, which Krish Swamy is one of the head of that. We have several of them. And only people in the Center of Excellence, they allow to build a quantitative model because we know those people are expert driver. So what do you think about this in terms of organizationally? How would we think about this so that we can have expert driver, expert operator who know how to manage this? Open to anybody.
Yeah, so to your point there, Agus, I really like the way you're approaching that and the way you frame that question up, because I'll take us back to business continuity again. One of the goals that we have in business continuity is to identify the most critical resources inside the organization so that we can frame them up correctly and figure out in the event of a disaster, how quickly do we need those resources back in seat, so to speak, right? Well, what you've identified here is kind of a level of different criticalities for different roles in the organization. One of the things over the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen data in its own right creep up the chart, so to speak, of criticality to becoming essentially the static number 2 most critical resource in any organization. And it would be very unlikely that the number one resource would ever be toppled, which is people, right? And their roles and their functions and their expertise and what they bring to the table for us. It would be hard to have data supersede, the number one most critical resource in the organization. But what we have to make sure of, and I'm a firm advocate for ensuring we've got the right people in the right roles, that they're bringing their best self to the table every day so that value is added at the highest levels, right? But then to also to a point I think you were making, you've still got to be able to develop the people that may not be at the top of the criticality list, right? Because you're very likely going to have some very bright, very intelligent people that just need that trust, just need that chance and opportunity to elevate themselves and show that they can become that Formula One race car driver instead of a pit crew chief, right?
Harish, you've been in two different institutions, Harish. So
Yeah,
share with us.
I have mixed feelings about this whole center of excellence concept, frankly. I think more often than not, it's an admission and recognition of the fact that the talent or the processes in the organization are not very well established. That's why you need that type of structure. The benefit always is that you have maybe better talent, better processes. The downside is you generally move much slower than you should or you can. And then there is one more downside, which maybe is less obvious. As you start having this center of excellence, you start moving away from the actual problem in the business. And that can create significant issues in solving the problem, even frankly, even creating the right problem statement, because you are not actually that close to the problem as you should be. So I think every organization has to decide it for themselves, but I don't think it's a good long-term solution. More and more so now, because the biggest threat to a money center bank is not another money center bank. The biggest threat to a money center bank now is a fast-moving fintech. So the center of excellence culture, I think, is a good crutch, but we should all be very clear about the disadvantages or limitations of it and kind of strive to slowly and steadily move away from it.
Yeah, Harish, though the counter to that, which I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, is that with tools for building these models becoming effectively drag and drop, okay, I think it creates a benefit of taking the friction away from the model development. But in many cases, that friction is a good thing. Okay, that friction allows you to, understand the data, understand the problem, make sure you're building the right models. What I've seen too many times is people building models where, even though they're embedded in the business, even though they have access to the data, because they have access to the data and because they have access to those drag and drop tools, they turn around models which do not address the business problem, which are not structurally sound. So I get your point, but I think the key though is that you need an analytic problem-solving mindset. You need fundamentally to be able to understand things like data leakage.
And you're kind of highlighting the point, because you don't have, let's say, either the talent or the right process sitting across the organization. You need the COE, right? What I'm saying is it's a good short-term solution, but I don't think you can be a nimble, agile company in today's environment if you keep doing that forever, right?
Yeah.
I think from
Stu, you want to say something, Stu? Go ahead, Stu. Oh, we lost Stu. Stu?
He may be having some network issues.
Okay.
Then I'll jump in, because what Harish, you said, really resonates a lot with me, because I think when I think about governance or processes, I think the challenge ahead of I think most of the MRM teams is to set up the processes in a way that we can automate them properly. Because when you think about automation, I think you first have to think about the whole process, about the how it flows from development to validation, maybe to implementation to the audit. And I think it's important to make a process there that is in fact automatable. Otherwise, you can like have all your fancy tools, all your fancy technology, but if you don't have a process there that is set up in a way that it's not like built for manual process, but for like a really like a automatable process, you're never gonna be able to effectively really like speed up this whole process, right? I think so. I think I encountered a lot of MRM streams that were built based on a very manual idea, or like an idea of like very manual processes there. And I think like once you shift your paradigm from, hey, we are doing it manually to, hey, we're doing it automatically, you have to redesign the whole process completely.
And that's
Stu,
where I
say
do.
something, Stu. Go ahead,
ahead,
Stu.
Go ahead,
I
Stu.
want to give
Yeah,
time to
sorry, yes. It's
Go ahead.
definitely a live broadcast here, so I apologize. What I was going to say is, I think what I hope everybody listens to this discussion between Krish and Harish. In our experience, this really frames so many discussions in organizations. And what I'll say is that I think, Agus, back to your analogy, and I would push actually on both. I think this tension is a natural tension. We have model risk, programs that says, hey, we can't have a special case over here. We really need a enterprise-wide visibility. But market demands and market pressures, right? And actually, to your point exactly, Harish, like fintechs and others demand that organizations have a very different, really unleash innovation and freedom at the business unit level. Whether it's credit line increases or fraud detection, or who's going to get the loan or whatever, or customer acquisition. So there's just such a competitive environment. So the challenge of being able to have both enterprise patterns that scale and handle the variety of different innovations that is only going to accelerate because you're adding technology to that fire, right? So that's really the challenge. Luckily, there is kind of a framework emerging where, Harish, to your point much earlier, the model becomes the organizing principle. And it's not the static model. It's not the model that any one group, data science or risk or ever, says, oh yeah, that's what we think, it's a model. It's really a dynamic asset that has to capture all that context. So anyways, I just think that this tension is solvable, but it's a challenge. In our experience, it's definitely solvable, but it's a very challenging organizational problem and kind of requires that comprehensive view, which groups like this exactly are how you get that started on the journey.
Yeah, so Stu, I like your perspective on that tension, because I think, let's look at, into our crystal ball for the next 5 years. That tension only gets more drastic because what we're going to continue to see, I think, at a much more rapid pace and velocity, is the marriage of models and bots, RPA, for decisioning purposes. We're going to start to see those marry even more, and we're going to start to see more of decisioning factors, whether it's who gets a loan, who gets, whether they get a loan, what interest rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We could, come up with a lot of different perspectives on what examples that would look like. But we're going to start to see a lot more of that coming to bear in the next 5 years. And the only way that can happen is the true marriage of the models that are developed by way of AI and machine learning married into those bots themselves.
This is a very, very interesting discussion here. So we probably short of time here. I want to ask the one last question, though, that I would like to do. I think it's from what I learned here is the importance of people, process, and technology. And for me is the road to hell paved with all good intention. Yes. And that's at the end of the day what we try to avoid by model risk management, right? We all have good intention, but we go to hell. That's something that we don't want to. In particular today, when credit increase, line increase, all of those things can have unintended consequence, like the disparate impact, discrimination and all of those things. So what can we do? We talk about the people. We need to really develop people across the board in the company. We need to have a good process. So my last question is really the technology enabler. Nothing will substitute process and people here, but I think technology have a role to enable of a good governance and good execution. So I would like to open it up before as the last question here. Why don't we start with Stu, and then I want to have the rest of you to chime in.
Sure. Well, obviously we're in the business of technology enablement for handling, these challenges as large organizations move toward automated decisioning. I would say broadly speaking, that would be enterprise AI. We've been, especially in financial services, models have been part of the decisioning process since the beginning, but traditionally more supporting human decisioning. To your point, Agus, about the race cards, now these models are making very fast, very critical top line and risk-bearing decisions in an automated fashion. And so a technology enabler is going to have to come into play to solve this at scale, because it's the technology that's enabling the innovation in terms of modeling and automated decisioning. And I would just, again, point to kind of it does have a nice affinity with our company name, but there's an industry term called ModelOp, which is really bringing the model as an enterprise asset that includes the risk context, the data science context, the IT context, the security context, cybersecurity context, we didn't even touch on, the business context, and allowing that at the enterprise level in a model inventory, as Dan mentioned, to be dynamic and evergreen with automated processes that allow for the differentiation of model types and use cases, the actionable monitoring. So just what you said, is there a kill switch? That's not good enough today, right? We have to have these models really need to be taken out of production because they're putting pricing information and we could be facing it the wrong way. These models are just making recommendations right now. We know they're wrong, but it would actually be worse to bring this web service down. So we got to keep them in and start moving them through. So this kind of complexity and response, and then of course, the kind of visibility that even board level visibility we see being demanded. Hey, we're spending X amount of dollars on data science and creating automated models. Like, where is that going? What's the return on that? Which groups are actually effectively using that technology? So I think that technology and enablement is absolutely critical because this is a technology fueled problem.
Harish, I want you make comments on this before we close.
Yeah, I think one of the easiest things almost every company can do is have a very clear articulated set of tests for every different family of models, which should be shared with all the developers. And frankly, that whole thing should be automated both for MRM and developers. So when the stuff comes to MRM, 90% of the work is already done, right? And that can create so much value and increase speed in the company. And I don't think most companies have kind of utilized this basic principle.
Excellent, excellent. So Krish, probably in the beginning of this, because we are working on what we dub as validation on demand, basically as the validation tests that design and built by model validation, but is executed by model development. So I think we are in a very, very exciting time in terms of process and people and technology. So thank you very much, everybody. Very, very lively discussion. I learned a lot from all of you. So thank you. So I'll back to you, Patricia.
Wow, this has been an incredible discussion. So thank you all. All of our panelists have been absolutely wonderful. And a special thank you to Agus for moderating for us and keeping us on track. I know this virtual audience is going wild with virtual applause. Thank you all again for your time today. And for the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.